Hello and welcome to Controlling Cloud Backup Costs, Have Your Cake and Eat It. Today's webinar is a Veeam Trailblazer Talk presented by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any and all questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of this presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to three things: a report on 2023 cloud trends, a dummies book on hybrid cloud backup, and a webinar playback link on 10 best practices for hybrid cloud backup. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in your handout section as well. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenter. And to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50, for the best question. So after the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in and pick out the very best one and contact that prize winner. So with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. We have Sam Nichols, Director of Public Cloud Marketing at Veeam Software. Sam, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me today, Scott. Thanks for everyone joining us today as well. It's been a while since I've been on a Trailblazer talk, and I really like doing these. It's typically less geared towards Veeam and just kind of what's going on in the industry and some best practices that you can be implementing. So really excited to discuss those today. Like Scott mentioned, we do like to keep these as interactive as possible. We put these webinars on for you to hopefully take some interesting knowledge away that you can put into practice. But, I'm certainly not a mind reader, as I tell my wife. Any questions that you have, questions, comments, concerns, requests, please throw them in the chat. I'd love to get to those. And like Scott says, the one that stumps me will win that $50. So let's dive into the content today around controlling cloud backup costs. Have your cake and eat it. And I kind of threw that piece in there because what we're typically seeing is organizations that are really having to choose one or the other when it comes to budget or protection, right? If they have a high degree of protection, it typically comes with a high budget. And if they pull money or funds away from their data protection, it typically lessens the degree of protection that they have, or the length of time that they can retain their data for, or how performant the backup solution is. So these best practices are all around like striking that balance so that you can meet performance from an RPO and RTO perspective. You can meet retention for a service level objective or compliance perspective without blowing out your budgets. And the first slide that I really wanted to show you is actually from Flexera's State of the Cloud report. This is their most recent one from 2023. And it's really interesting because they asked the question, what are your organization's top cloud challenges of the last 12 months? And they've done this report for a number of years now, but this was the first year where all organizations from the enterprise to the SMB agreed that managing cloud spend was their top challenge, ahead of security, right? And I feel like everywhere we look, ransomware and security is a huge topic out there, and not trying to minimize that, it absolutely is. But, I think this is ultimately a product of cloud has pretty quickly become the kind of de facto standard for at least deploying new applications and workloads. And certainly there's a lot of lift and shift and refactoring of workloads that have been running on premises to the cloud. So the cloud has exploded. And some of this is lack of expertise and resources. I think it's just that knowledge of how the cloud runs. And it is very, very different to on-premises, right? On-premises, we are used to procuring servers and storage and networking equipment as a capital expenditure. We try and get that to have as much longevity as possible. And it's just always there. We pay that one-time capital expenditure. Maybe there's some maintenance and support associated with that, but it's, the big piece is up front. Whereas the cloud model is, pay as you go, pay for what you use, build in arrears. And if you don't have, this really granular visibility into exactly what you're doing, sometimes that bill at the end of the month can come as a shock as to how expensive it is. And we certainly worked with customers that, are just like, my backup bill is crazy. What can I do to get this lower? And certainly Veeam can come in and help, and I'll show you that on the next slide. But managing cloud spend, again, from enterprises to SMB, especially in the economy we're in, is of critical importance, and that's what we wanted to talk about today. So I did promise you, how Veeam is helping some organizations, both large and small, control and optimize their cloud spend from a backup lens. And we're going to go into 5 best practices to control and optimize that spend in a bit, again, through that backup lens. But a lot of these can apply to things that, are an adjacency to data protection or just general cloud best practices. So probably my favorite one on here is Ciox Health. They are using AWS and Azure. They actually had a number of data centers across the United States managing hundreds and thousands, probably millions of medical records. And they kind of went through this deprecation of their data centers, consolidating into AWS, Azure, and they actually have a co-location. But it's really interesting with them is the backups of AWS that they're creating are being stored on Azure and vice versa. And then in their co-location, they're storing that in AWS. So there's a lot of cross-cloud backup and recovery here. And the thing that springs to mind for most folks is, well, how much are they paying in terms of egress costs? They actually pay 0 in terms of egress costs. And that will be as part of one of these best practices. You can see here, they create immutable backups across cloud, 500 terabytes of data daily, and just a $20,000 a month spend all up for backup, right? It's not just the storage component, that's their licensing, it's the compute, it's the networking associated. So for how much data there is and the fact that they're doing cross cloud, that's a very, very low bill for that size of environment and type of environment. Next up is Hudson Bay Corporation. They're the holdings company for probably a more recognizable name would be Saks Fifth Avenue, I think it is, a department store. They are also using us to protect AWS and Azure, and their Veeam investment firstly helped them save more than $1 million in that one-time CapEx. Again, not procuring hardware and infrastructure on premises, but $600,000 in recurring OpEx annually. And you can see here, we make that simple as well. We're taking the noise out of data protection and allowing their cloud engineers, architects, and administrators to not babysit backup 24/7, really to kind of automate that, have it running like a well-oiled machine and go and focus on other, strategic initiatives and innovating for the business. So I guess HBC is a large enterprise, Ciox Health, probably kind of in that upper commercial space. And then Best Friends Animal Society, which is an AWS user, again, using Veeam kind of on that smaller end, non-profit. They're saving, for them, $42,000 a year that enabled them to actually purchase a new data lake for predictive analytics. So, this is the other big thing. It's not just about reducing the bill just to save on budget. It's so that data protection within the cloud isn't eating so much of our technology budgets that we are not able to do those innovative things. So that new data lake for predictive analytics is ultimately helping out there to go out and complete their mission of saving more and more pets out there. So, nice heartwarming story there, but ultimately all of them are having their cake and eating it, right? They're doing exactly what they want to do. They're freeing up that capital to go and invest in other areas of their business. And absolutely Veeam is helping them to do that. But let's take a look at some of these 5 best practices. Again, these all apply to Veeam, but a lot of these will apply to other data protection solutions as well. And it might not just be data protection. It's just a general understanding of how stuff can and does work in the public cloud, and some tools that are available to you to ultimately help you control that cost. So we'll first, I think the obvious one is going to be around storage, and we'll absolutely get to that. But the first one that I want to discuss is right-sizing your compute, right? Right-sizing is an ongoing 2-day operation that's going to help you optimize costs. As I mentioned at the beginning, in the public cloud, you're paying for every ounce of compute, storage, networking that you're consuming, and that is billed in arrears and can often result in something called bill shock. When it comes to compute, you are billed per hour. So there are a number of different instances that are available across dozens of different regions across, if we're looking at hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, Google, it's literally tens of thousands of instances that you have available to you, all of them with different benefits and all of them with different potential drawbacks when it comes to cost. So you really want to make sure that you are monitoring and managing and continually matching the required performance of whatever it is that you're running in the cloud to what that machine can deliver. Too often we see a number of organizations that will throw too much memory and too much compute at a resource that doesn't necessarily need it. Or they will have sorry, there's a child screaming in the background. My kids are at home. It is still summer, but I've lost my train of thought. But the other workloads are ephemeral, right? They are very short-lived. They might just be spun up for a few minutes or a few hours every day, and we'll see that a little bit later on. And if they never turn them off, they're just being billed for that piece of compute, and it's not doing anything. So here are some 3 considerations. Look at things like constant loads. So something that has very, very predictable memory consumption and CPU performance, and make sure that you're using something like a reserved instance. This is in the case of AWS, but Azure and Google have something very, very similar, because those ones are optimized from a pricing perspective to be running at all times. If you have a workload that is relatively constant, but there is predictable bursting throughout the day, maybe during business hours, or there's something at the close of business every day that happens, autoscaling is a great way to do that as well. Again, it takes advantage of a relatively smaller performant piece of compute, but that will automatically scale at that specific time in order to get that job done as fast as possible without paying for the enhanced demand for 24 hours. And then those temporary workloads often benefit from spot instances. So we're going to look at these a little bit later on, but temporary workloads might be data movers when it comes to backup and recovery. So just really understanding the different types of compute compute resources that are available, again, from a CPU and from a memory and from a bandwidth perspective, making sure that you match that to your needs, and then really understanding the different pricing components as well that are associated. And these are all published on AWS, Azure, Google's website for you to help make that decision. They also make available some tools. In AWS, it's Amazon CloudWatch. In Azure, it's Azure Monitor, that will help you really look at your environment and see all of this ongoing and help you make these decisions. So it's fully transparent, and you can really optimize for cost without sacrificing on that performance piece. And as we tie that into backup and recovery, that's always going to be consuming compute as we create those snapshots, as we create image-based backup from those snapshots, as we run an appliance that does all of this, as we spin up data movers that create those image-based backups and store them from a snapshot onto object storage. These are all considerations that we need to make. And I'll show you in a little bit of a demo later on some best practices that we have published as well. So you're kind of not going in cold, and you've got a good base to go off of. Next up is around storage, right? We're in the data protection business. We're ultimately creating copies of data, and that's got to be stored somewhere, and that's got to be paid for. The most common types of storage that are available in the public cloud are block storage. So for AWS, that is Amazon EBS. For Azure, it's Azure VMs. For Google Cloud, that is the managed disks. And then we've also got object storage flavors as well, right? So moving from block to object storage, AWS, that's S3, and a dozen different tiers that are available there, relatively similar to Azure with Azure Blob, Hot, Cool, Archive, and same for Google Cloud. And really just understanding what the benefits of each of these types of storage are. Block storage is typically where the snapshots that we create are initially stored. And snapshots are fantastic because they offer us very, very low RTOs and very low RPOs. So if we have that low RPO, we need to be taking a snapshot every 15 minutes because this is a mission critical application. If we need to be able to recover very, very quickly, doing so from a snapshot that is stored on block storage on an attached volume is going to be very, very quick. However, snapshots are among the most expensive storage options. For Amazon or AWS, we're talking about 5 cents per gigabyte per month. And that adds up very, very quickly. Different regions have very slightly different variations of that. It might be 5.5 cents per gigabyte per month. Some might be 6, but it's around that ballpark figure. And if we have retention requirements for internal service level objectives or compliance where we have to keep data for a specified period of time, so I'm talking about the finance industry, healthcare, sometimes records have to be protected and stored indefinitely. Doing so on that very, very expensive storage is going to drive up our bill very, very quickly. And we need to ask ourselves a question. Is a backup that might be years and years old, what's the likelihood of us having to recover from that? Very, very minimal. So that high performance of a snapshot, we're never going to take advantage of that advantage. So how else can we store that? And that's an object storage. So we can take that image-based backup, and the advantage of taking an image-based backup is we can now compress that. So Veeam helps our customers there with a 2-to-1 compression ratio. So all of a sudden we're halving the size of the data there, but then we're storing it on much, much more cost-effective object storage. And there are a myriad tiers in between object storage that vary in terms of performance from a recovery perspective and cost. So that hot, warm object storage strikes a nice balance between that speed of retrieval or recovery, if we need to, have a recovery from a backup that, let's say, is a month old, but also doesn't blow up the bank, right? Even the most expensive object storage in AWS, just standard Amazon S3, is less than half the cost of those snapshots. It's 2.4 cents per gig per month. And again, we've got that compression ratio. We are halving that volume of data, and that's all of a sudden becoming much, much more cost effective for us. And then as the likelihood of needing to recover decreases more, we can put that on object storage that is more geared towards archival. It's optimized for long-term retention. Again, people that need to store data for years or indefinitely, and that's going to help them meet those retention requirements without blowing up the bank. We're now talking as low as fractions of a cent per gigabyte per month. So again, very, very cost effective. However, there are some drawbacks. It is effectively tape. In fact, it is tape in some instances, and that's going to take longer to recover from, sometimes hours, sometimes days, and sometimes there are retrieval fees that you have to pay for. But again, think about it from a fact of what's the likelihood of me having to recover from a backup that's 2 years old? Very, very small. The benefits of fractions of a cent per gigabyte per month for storage is going to outweigh that. So again, just think about what are your retention needs, what are your performance needs, and how do those align with different costs? And again, I'm going to give you a bit of a demo in a little bit on how Veeam does all of this, just so you can see it in action. Next up is understanding data transfer fees, right? There are numbers of different regions within each public cloud that if we store data, if the production data lies within that region and we're going to store the backup within that region, there is typically no cost from a networking or data transfer perspective. All right, and that's great. But however, there are compliance requirements, or sometimes we're planning for DR, where we want to store our backups in a completely different region, right? Maybe production is in US East 1, and I want to store my backups in US West 1. Transferring that data across the region is going to incur networking or transfer fees. So it's very critical to understand what are my mission critical applications, what are the ones that kind of need that geographical redundancy, and making sure that I'm only doing that cross-region backup for those workloads, and those with more tolerance for a longer period of downtime. If that region were to go down, maybe it's like a development workload, making sure that I keep those in region are going to help me to keep my costs lower. Now, I mentioned at the beginning what Ciox Health was doing. Amazon EC2 instances are being protected in Azure. Azure VMs and Azure SQL is being protected in AWS, and they are not paying any egress fees. How do they do that? So consider some of the networking technologies that are available from these vendors to help eliminate those egress fees. So site-to-site VPN in AWS, there's Direct Connect. In Azure, there's ExpressRoute, and that's going to help curb those fees. It essentially treats that cross-cloud backup as a cross-region backup. So yes, you're still paying transfer fees, but you're not paying egress fees. And again, we go back to Ciox, 500 terabytes of immutable backups per day, license, compute, storage, networking, all in $20,000 a month. It can become very, very cost effective. You've just got to architect it correctly with these different options when it comes to cross-region or potentially cross-cloud backup and recovery. Next up is around automation. Big proponent for automate. I completely automate my daily routine, from opening blinds, putting on a soundscape, making coffee, turning on lights, because it just makes my life easier. And the same goes for backup and recovery. The same goes for pretty much anything in IT. Anything that is a repetitive operation, there are a number of first-party tools available from the cloud vendors themselves, as well as third-party tools like Veeam that can completely eliminate those costly manual operations, help you improve efficiency, and then drive that time investment, those resources, those FTEs towards other more innovative strategic initiatives, again, like HPC is doing. So when it comes to data protection, building out policy-based automation is going to be very, very helpful. There's still a number of organizations out there that will just use their cloud console to manually create a snapshot to protect their data. Maybe they'll write a script for it, but that really doesn't help show them where's the unprotected data, especially when shadow IT is a big problem in the cloud. So building out policy-based automation is going to be critical, not only for getting rid of those manual tasks, kind of set it and forget it, don't have to babysit backup anymore, but it helps me capture unprotected data that might be spun up versus me having to go out and create a policy for it or start manually taking those snapshots. One of the best ways to do that is with tagging. And again, I'll show you that in a demo, but you can build out several different policies based on, what RTO and RPO and retention requirements are out there. Assign a tag for that policy to look for and just implement that tagging culture across your developers and cloud engineers and anyone else spinning up applications in the public cloud. So as they come online and they have that tag associated, it will automatically be captured by the backup tool and protected. And then anything that is transient, ephemeral, dynamic, I can't think of any other thesaurus words for it, but anything that is short-lived in terms of compute resources, you should automate that as well. So another good example is that data mover piece. Whenever an image-based backup is created, or whenever we do a recovery from a backup or a file level recovery, we have to consume compute. But though that compute doesn't need to be up and running as a data mover at all times of the day. It should only be up and running when you need it and then automatically terminated when you don't. Again, just to keep that bill down. And if you can automate that, that becomes much, much easier. And then the final one is around predict and forecast, right? So again, when compute, network, storage, anything that you do in the cloud is a pay for what you use and build in arrears. Anything that you can do to predict and forecast that cost is going to help you alleviate that bill shock. Again, there's a number of tools out there. We discussed CloudWatch and Azure Monitor. There are a number of calculators available from AWS, Azure, Google, and some backup and recovery tools have calculators built within them that are going to help you forecast the cost based on what you input and the data that that tool is being pointed at, and then list prices to at least give you a good idea as to how much that is going to cost you. You're going to eliminate that bill shock, but also help you align your service level objectives with budgets, right? Have your cake and eat it as well. And then the final piece is negotiate agreements based on annual consumption for significant discounts, right? So in Azure, it's called a MAC agreement, MECC. In AWS, it used to be called EDP, and I can't remember, but essentially it's an enterprise agreement whereby you will commit to a certain volume of spend with that cloud provider, and they will give you discounts when you meet that. So I'm going to spin up this demo environment because we're already 25 minutes in. Whilst I do so, Scott, have we had any questions come in yet that you might want to fire my way?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a question here from Evgeny, who is asking about multi-cloud environments. So, a lot of these best practices that you've talked about are great. Probably some of them apply. He's wondering any advice to manage costs in multi-cloud.
In multi-cloud, so it's a great question, Yevgeny. Thanks so much for that. I would firstly kind of bring up this slide again, which is the Ciox Health one. They are, again, using for cross-cloud transfers, so a backup of an Amazon EC2 instance that is being stored in Azure or vice versa, utilizing things like Direct Connect and Express Route will help you get rid of those egress fees. The other big one is going to be around consolidating your backup and recovery tools across, your multi-cloud environment. We can actually see here on this slide in the green, this is the enterprise column, that while managing multi-clouds relatively close to the bottom for all organizations, it's kind of being skewed by the SMB. It's actually the second priority for sorry, my daughter's at the door. It's actually the second priority for enterprises, right? And that's because they have that much higher propensity towards multi-cloud. So being able to consolidate your backup and recovery tool to a single vendor like Veeam, because yes, we can protect everything on premises, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, SaaS applications like Microsoft 365 and Salesforce, containerized workloads that are managed by Kubernetes. Doing so on a single vendor will help you take advantage of volume-based discounts. It will help out in terms of consolidating management, improving efficiencies, and reassigning FTEs to, again, other more strategic initiatives. So those are some, I guess, initial pointers for that, Evgeny. Okay. I hope that answered your question.
All right, super. Yeah, and do you want to take more questions now, or do you want to go into the demo and come back?
Yeah, let's keep the questions going while the slides are up.
All right, sure. Yeah, so we also had a couple of questions here about, reducing cloud bloat. So Paul was wondering, can Veeam assist organizations who are trying to minimize cloud bloat in the effort to streamline cloud backup costs? And Mike had a sort of related question of, how best to determine if there are unnecessary or redundant services running in my cloud environment that could be eliminated or significantly reduced. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to address Mike's piece, again, Amazon CloudWatch, Azure Monitor, fantastic tools for looking at either resources that are underutilized or over-provisioned or just not being utilized at all. Those are fantastic tools to look at to help you understand, okay, what can I turn down or turn off and terminate? Or what could I potentially assign to a different type of instance that is more optimized for how that workload performs. So again, maybe it's something that bursts predictably. Maybe it's something that will benefit better from a spot instance versus just running at all times on a reserved instance. Those are great tools to help you identify those. From a cloud bloat perspective, I would say from a storage piece, Veeam really helps. And I see another question here, and hopefully this answers this. It's from Pam around incremental and full snapshots. The first snapshot and the first backup we take will always be a full one. But subsequently from there on out, it is incremental, right? So we have that change block tracking. We're looking for the change blocks. And those are the ones that we are ultimately going to protect. That's going to help minimize that backup size quite considerably versus taking a full backup, which is going to be compute intensive, storage intensive. And if you're doing cross-region or cross-cloud, transfer intensive as well. We then have that compression component as well. That's one of the huge benefits of doing an image-based backup versus just storing a snapshot, whether that's on block storage or object storage, is we can then compress that backup by as much as 2 to 1. So that's all of a sudden shrinking your footprint in half. So that will, again, help out with the cloud bloat. And again, I would just be a big advocate for tiering. As a snapshot ages, the likelihood of you having to recover from it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So retaining that snapshot for months or potentially years, which I have seen customers do, is it's just wasted money that could be invested elsewhere. You can still protect that data. You can still retain that snapshot as an image-based backup, just on a different type of storage that, again, is much more optimized and streamlined for longer term retention, and much more cost effective. Starting at half the price of a snapshot, going down to literally fractions of a cent per gigabyte per month. So those would be some initial advice there for Pam, Paul, and Mike. Thanks for the questions.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic suggestions there. We've got one more question here from Alexis, who's wondering about moving an object storage repository. Alexis is wondering, what is being transferred? Only modified blocks?
Yep. Comes back to that full versus incremental question. So another good question, Alexis. Initially, that full snapshot and that full backup, that's going to be initially transferred. We have to have something, but then after that, everything is an incremental backup, right? So again, we're looking at change block tracking to identify only those modified blocks, and then that's what we're protecting from there on out. And again, that's helping cut down on compute, it's helping cut down on storage, and potentially helping cut down on network transfer fees if you're going cross-regional, cross-cloud. So Veeam certainly does that. I'm not saying every vendor does it, but certainly something to look at, again, to help keep that bill small.
Okay, super. Well, thanks everybody for the questions so far. And, Sam, we've gotten through all the ones that we have at the moment. So you want to move forward with the demo?
Yeah,
I can
sounds
see
good.
your screen. Yep, I can see your screen.
Is the size of these kind of widgets looking good?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, great. So this is actually our Veeam Backup for AWS product. It's part of the Veeam Data Platform. It's essentially an appliance, a proxy that helps us protect workloads in AWS. If you have it configured, this is essentially what you're greeted with. It's a dashboard. I can see successes, warnings, failures. So it actually looks like I've got something to fix here. I can click in and see where the failure is. Okay, so it looks like some sort of IAM permission from a security perspective. So I'm going to have to go fix that. But this isn't about security today. This is about cost. So taking a look at just from a cost perspective, I can see here, my storage usage from a snapshot and a backup perspective and an archive perspective, what types of storage those are stored on. I can also see over here kind of bottlenecks. So are my policies sized appropriately? Are they protecting too many machines, or have I oversized the instance that is powering these policies? And am I paying too much there? Here, again, we can kind of see some streamlining. Everything looks great in my environment from that perspective, except for this big old failure over here and some unprotected EC2 instances. But here's just a brief little dashboard that helps us look into that. If you're actually just getting started, though, this is what you'll be greeted with. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to look at two different pieces from a cost angle. First off is the workers. These are our data movers that will help us create those image-based backups or help us perform a restore from a backup, not from a snapshot. We don't need a data mover for a recovery from a snapshot or a file level recovery. But here we can see what availability zone that those are hosted in, so we can process all that data in region, again, eliminate those fees, as well as set up what type of workers I'm going to use. And if I head over to here, this is Veeam Backup for AWS. We actually have some recommendations here if you're just getting started on what type of workers or EC2 instances would be recommended based on how big the EBS volume or volumes it is that you're trying to process. So anything that's less than 1,024 gigabytes or a terabyte would be C5 large. anything between that and 1250, C5XL, anything beyond that, C5-2XL, or anything for archiving of different sizes would be a C5-2XL or a C5-4XL. So we do have a number of best practices out there that you can look at to help out. The other piece is the repositories. So you can see here I've got a number of different S3 repositories. Some of them are standard S3, some are Glacier Deep Archive, but this is exactly where I'm going to point stuff to in my policies. So making just sure that those repositories are built out within an S3 bucket or an Azure Blob or Google Cloud Storage. It's going to be huge, again, to help you curb your costs. But these are essentially just initial settings that you'll go through. But the policy-based automation is kind of really where the magic comes in and what I wanted to show you in this demo. So I'm just going to go ahead and edit this policy that I have created here. So firstly, we'll just give it a name and a description. You know, we're doing a demo, so let's just call it demo. The first piece we're going to look at are the sources. All right, so what is it that I'm trying to protect? First off, we've got to define an IAM role. So this is the identity and access management that allows the appliance to perform backup and restore abilities to those workloads that we're trying to protect. But then what is it we're trying to protect? All right, so regions. I can select a specific region. Right here, I've got US East Virginia, but I could move all of these over if I wanted. And the policy is then going to look for any EC2 instance within these regions to protect. So it's telling me right now that I've got 2 resources within US Virginia, I think it was. Yeah, US East Virginia, here we go, that I can protect. Now, do I want to protect all the resources within that region, or do I only want to protect following resources? And I can just go on an individual instance by instance basis, or I can do tags, which is what I was talking about earlier. And what we see a number of organizations doing is kind of creating policies based on tiers. So they might have like a diamond, a gold, a silver, and a bronze tier. And those in the diamond tier are having snapshots taken every 5 minutes. And because it's mission critical data and there's compliance reasons, we're storing that data for, I don't know, X number of years. But those that are in the bronze tier are only having like a daily backup being taken, and we're only going to store it for a couple of months. So instead of trying to take a one-size-fits-all approach and treating all data as the same, you can build those policies and then implement that tagging culture. So as new workloads come online, not only are you not having to go in and create a new policy or add it to a policy or whatever it might be, it's going to automatically do that and free up your time, but it's also going to have the right type of performance, the right type of compute, storage, networking resources allocated to it to, again, optimize for costs. We can choose to exclude specific resources if we want, or exclude the attached EBS volumes to those EC2 instances. Again, this is AWS. It's the same in Azure. It's the same in Google Cloud. Next up in the policy, do we want to enable application-aware snapshots? For Microsoft Windows, we use VSS. For Linux, you can choose to add pre or post scripts for Linux instances. You can also do the same for Windows. So we can quiesce those applications, whatever it might be, so we can have that zero data loss backup and recovery. Next up, we're going to choose targets. So do I just want to create snapshots? Do I want to create backups as well? Or do I also want to replicate snapshots across regions as well? You can see here that I've actually got it turned on within this policy. But for the sake of this conversation, let's look at snapshots and backups. Snapshots are automatically going to be taken. They are the default first line of defense. The backups here, we can see that I've got them turned on. Where am I going to store them? So anything that's a backup is going to be stored in standard S3 storage. It's going to be there in US East 1, which is North Virginia. So all within region. Anything that's archival will be on S3 Glacier Deep Archive. Here you can see archive again in US East 1. And again, these are the much lower tiers of storage that are going to help me curb my costs while retaining data in line with corporate mandates, compliance, whatever it might be. So now we're going to go and have a look at this. our scheduling. So do we want to do dailies, weeklies, monthlies, yearlies? You can turn some of these on or off. You can go and edit these settings. So right now, you can see here that I'm taking one snapshot a day. I'm doing a replica a day and a backup a day. I can go in here if I wanted, and I could say, I want you to take 10 snapshots an hour. I want you to take 5. I want you to take 47 snapshots an hour. You can really go in and change this as you like. And then on the hour, do we want to do it every hour? Do I only want to do it for certain hours throughout the day? Like, maybe every 4 hours. You can really go in and make this however you want. And then what's the retention? So snapshots to keep, I'm only keeping 2. So if I'm only taking 1 snapshot a day, I'm only going to keep 2 days worth of snapshots. Same for replicas. But then my backups I'm going to keep for 7 days. And again, those backups are going to be stored on standard S3 storage. Similar story with the weeklies, except instead of every hour, we've got the different days of the weeks. Again, snapshots, backups. I'm not taking any snapshots here for my weeklies. I'm just doing backups. Same for monthlies, except we've got the different months of the years. Again, what are our retention settings? And if I wanted to turn yearlies on, we could do the same here as well. Keep archives for however many years. Next up, we can choose to add custom tags to these snapshots if you want to. Veeam, we actually automatically apply a tag to any Veeam backup snapshot. General settings as well. So if the policy fails, how many times am I going to retry? If it fails, do I want to send an email? So I could just say, if there's a failure after 3 times, send an email to test@veeam.com. And do I want to enable health checks? So this just looks at those data blocks, does a CRC check for the metadata, again, just to verify its integrity, so we can be more confident in our recoverability or success of recoverability. Now, this is the cool piece. So the next up, let's just turn this off. I don't know why it's not moving forward. Well, that's silly. Let's just go back into it. Here we go. It's the fact that I run a Mac. That's all it is. Windows is better. Here's the cost estimation. So based on the source data, the sources that we selected earlier, the targets that we're targeting, and the schedule that I've created, it is going to tell me exactly how much, or based on list prices, how much this is going to cost me each and every single month. So this is looking at it from a full backup as the initial, plus any incrementals based on a 3% churn. And it's saying my snapshots are costing me this much, replicas this much, backups this much, archives, so on and so forth. You kind of get the picture. Total cost for those 2 instances. It also breaks it down per instance. But this is super dynamic. I could go in and change the schedule if I want. This is a super mission critical application for me. I'm going to take 24 snapshots and I want to keep, I don't know, a week's worth of snapshots because I want to be able to recover from this super fast. So 24 times 7 is 168. And I'm going to keep my backups for 30 days instead. And I'm going to click apply. For my weeklies, I want to keep my backups for, 3 months. Monthlies, I want to keep those for 365 days. So on and so forth. You get the picture. I don't need to go through it completely, but then I can come back to my cost estimator, and now you can see it's automatically updated based on the new settings that I've put in. So again, now I can predict and forecast how much this is going to cost me. Have I incorrectly put a setting in? Am I being too aggressive with my service level objectives? Do I need to rethink my budgets in order to apply the right level of data protection to these workloads? Again, really helping you understand all of this. But anyway, quick summary, click finish. I'm going to cancel this because I'm not going to make a change because this is just a test. But you kind of get the idea. It's the same for RDS. We can also do this, and that's all 6 different flavors of RDS. We can do the same for EFS, file shares, some VPCs, your virtual private clouds. On Azure, it's Azure VMs, Azure SQL, and Azure Files. On Google Cloud, it's your Compute Engine VMs, and then Google Cloud SQL for MySQL and PostgreSQL. So lots of workloads in the public cloud that we can protect. And then the final piece I want to show you is just a recovery. I won't perform the actual recovery, but here you can see I can do a full instance restore or a full volume restore. That could be in place of the existing one. It could be as a completely new one, even in a different region. But sometimes I don't need to perform an entire recovery. It is just an individual file or folder I'm looking for. And again, that's going to help me cut down on compute, which is going to help me cut down on cost and also manage to recover stuff much, much quicker. So again, it's that same wizard-driven approach, right? What instances am I looking to recover from? Do I want to do an additional restore mode? So this is, do I want to download the file locally to the machine I'm accessing this from? Or do I want to inject the file back into its original location? Provide a quick reason. Again, this is a test. And then gives me the summary. And now it will spin up for me, or it would start to spin up our file level recovery URL. So this would then just be a browser where I can search for a file name, search for a folder name. I can browse through it, kind of like eDiscovery-esque, find it, and again, choose to insert that back where it initially was or download it to my local machine. But again, from a cost perspective, doing a recovery of, a single file that might be, a few kilobytes versus a 20.56 gigabyte Windows machine is going to be much quicker and much, much more cost effective. So that is, I think, everything from a cost perspective that aligns well with the topic we were talking about today. And I decided to put my screen to sleep. I'm telling you guys, it's the Mac. That kind of brings us back to the presentation. Scott, any more questions that have come in?
Yeah, we did get a couple of more, and really powerful demo. And I had a question about that cost calculator. So those numbers that come up, are they sort of ballpark, which would be pretty valuable in themselves, or do they tend to be pretty exact? What's your experience there?
So there are a myriad of an infinite number of different potentials out there, right? An organization might have negotiated like a MAC agreement or an EDP that sees them have reduced costs. The Veeam calculator looks at the list prices for those services versus the costs that you've negotiated. That would almost be impossible to do. The other assumption that we make is we see, just a moderate amount of churn to calculate the size of those incrementals. And that's a 3%. It's a pretty standard volume of churn there. So there are a couple of assumptions, but yeah, we see it get pretty close based on those assumptions. Again, if you have a machine that's going through like 10% of churn, or you have negotiated a 75% discount with AWS or Azure, it's going to be pretty significantly off. But so again, it's there to get you in the ballpark versus say like stone cold, this is exactly how much it's going to cost you.
Right. Yeah. And absolutely, very powerful, for that purpose. Thank you. So we've got a question here from Carrie, who was noting that in, the demo is Veeam backup for AWS. And Carrie's wondering if Veeam has tools that allow to see across all cloud platforms and see all backups holistically, or do you sort of launch different tools to get into different clouds?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Carrie. So the Veeam data platform is, we take a modular approach to that. So at the center of that would be what we call our Veeam data platform. It used to be called Veeam Backup and Replication. And that's really there to cover everything on premises. If your organization starts to scale out to AWS, you can choose to add that module, that appliance onto it, and it will then have centralized management and visibility of on-premises as well as what you have in AWS. You then choose to add Azure on and Google. It will all feed into that Veeam data platform so you can centrally manage your entire environment there. As part of Veeam data platform, you can go with a higher edition of that adds what used to be called Veeam One. So that's your centralized like monitoring, reporting, and analytics, again, across on-premises as well as in the different public clouds. So you can like, if I'm an AWS only organization, or I am an individual contributor that is only responsible for AWS. We're not going to force you into, essentially what would comparatively be a bigger platform just to get something that that essentially gives me something that I don't need. We take this modular approach. So I could see something that's just AWS only or the entirety of my environment. And then I can also move data across those different environments. If you're a cloud and service provider partner, we also have our Veeam Service Provider Console tool, which effectively does exactly the same thing, but from a service, like a multi-tenant service provider perspective as well. So yes, you absolutely can holistically and granularly look at all of this across the entirety of your environment, not just AWS, not just Azure. It can all be brought together.
Okay, fantastic. A related question from Salah, who's asking, they have multiple AWS accounts. So can it consolidate views of AWS accounts, or do you need sort of one console for each one?
This is a fantastic question because it also has the security angle on it as well. So thanks for that, Saleh. This appliance can look across all accounts within your organization. At the beginning, I kind of mentioned defining those IAM roles. That is where you would broker the backup and restore capabilities between the account that the appliance lives in and any other accounts that have workloads and or data in it that you want to protect. So you don't have to go out and deploy this in each and every single account and have multiple different appliances to manage and interface with. You would just have one central Veeam appliance to protect all of your accounts. And in fact, I would advocate for doing that, not just from an ease perspective, but from a security perspective as well. In our kind of on-premises days, we always advocated for physical separation between protection and production data, right? So between your production data and your backups. When we start moving into the cloud, which is someone else's data center, how do we sometimes achieve that physical separation? Well, it's through logical separation. And in AWS, they deem accounts as those security boundaries. In Azure, it's subscriptions. In Google Cloud, it's projects. I would always advocate for having a dedicated account just for the Veeam appliance and the backup repositories versus having it alongside your production data. I've seen too many cases in the news where, there's been a breach, a security breach into, a cloud account or subscription or project, and the backups are hosted in the same place. Once they get in and they start eradicating your production data, they're just going to go out and delete your backups as well, and you're going to have nothing to recover from. If you use that logical separation and then configure least privilege access, right? Take that principle of least privilege through your IAM roles between those accounts, that protection data, your backups are going to be much, much more secure than if they were lumped with your production data. And there's various other things that you can do layer on top of that. Using Veeam, the AWS does it as well, like encryption, like immutability, like multi-factor authentication and role-based access control. We have all of these secure access, secure storage, secure recovery capabilities that also align with security. So even though we're talking about cost, we did talk a little bit about security, but I'm okay with that. Hopefully that answers your question, Saleh.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Salah. It looks like we're running out of time, Sam, and we have gotten through all the questions there that we had. But just as a last question, if somebody wants to get started with some of the Veeam technologies that you've showed here today, what's the next step for them?
Yeah, we've got a multitude of different options for you. We do have a free version of this product, this appliance, available in AWS Marketplace, Azure Marketplace, and Google Cloud Marketplace. You can go and deploy it for free. We let you back up to 10 instances for free. That is VMs, that is databases, that is file shares. We don't care about the size of them, big or small, up to 10 instances for free. There's no limitations on recovery. There's no feature limitations beyond. You don't get that centralized hybrid multi-cloud management that Kerry was asking about. So that is a paid piece. That is one option, though. So if you just want to go get hands-on, the other option to get hands-on is within our free labs. So we I've written some Terraform scripts on a lab platform that will go up and spin up a real world AWS or Azure environment for you. And you can go through the entire deployment process of our appliance, the configuration that we kind of skimmed over right at the beginning, and then start playing around with data, deleting data, performing restores. And those labs are completely free and are available on our Veeam website as well. So that is one other option for you.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Well, Sam, thanks again. Great presentation. Great demo. Appreciate all the insights in the Q&A as well. It's always a delight to have you on. Thanks for bringing us up to speed.
Thanks. There's one last question. Guillermo asks, probably the best question of the day. I say that a bit tongue-in-cheek, but what is Sam's favorite cake? I'm a huge fan of New York cheesecake, Guillermo. So if you like the presentation, please feel free to send me a New York cheesecake. I would absolutely love it.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks again, Sam.
Thank you.
All right. And it is time for the prize drawing. And so we have that Amazon gift card to give away. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Waleed Mail from Virginia. So congratulations to Waleed Mail. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam again for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.